And now, ladies and gentlemen,
motion controls. Really, they're not that bad, but the way they're designed in most games is really bad. Most developers that implemented motion controls would promise us deeper immersion, but then we'd get something like this. This is RedSteel, an FPS game made exclusively for the Nintendo Wii that promised immersion like no other FPS game, but it doesn't really work. Do you remember playing a game with a sticky controller? RedSteel pretty much feels like you always have a sticky controller. The game awkwardly uses the Wiimote's functionality. They substitute buttons with motion. This adds another layer of measurement, and not only do you have to do a motion at a certain time, but you have to do that motion correctly. The game's mechanics deal with actions that seem like they would work well with buttons, but not with motions. Things like zooming in, throwing a grenade, using the slow motion feature, or sword fighting. The problem is that these mechanics require fast reactions, like in any action-packed FPS game. But RedSteel isn't like every other FPS game. It's supposed to be designed for the Wiimote. These mechanics don't always register, and they don't always work. They're not buttons, so doing these actions require a little bit of luck. And this makes the controls feel clunky. You're trying to pull off a certain sword move, but you can't. You throw a grenade and it goes somewhere you weren't expecting. You zoom into a space you didn't want to zoom into. Yes, the motion controls themselves aren't perfect, but the game's design stuck with a regular FPS style, meaning that they're designing the game as if you could pull off all these motions flawlessly without any error. Some people might say that that's the fault of the Wii technology, but I beg to differ. Metroid Prime 3 is a game that knew how to design a world to complement the controller. The game is based around pointing, which is what the Wiimote was designed for. There's nothing central to the game that requires an awkward wagging or flicking. These are usually saved for something that doesn't require fast reactions. Everything complements the controller, as if they were paying attention to how the game felt and weren't trying to stuff motion controls into every crevice of the game. RedSteel's use of motion controls don't add any immersion. They're at best gimmicky and at worst incompetent. Ubisoft was hoping to make something alongside virtual reality with RedSteel, where it actually feels like you're controlling the weapon. But because of the design, this doesn't work. Using pointer-like controls on an FPS makes everything feel narrow. You're not directly handling your gun, you're using a controller to handle your gun. It's the difference between picking up a stuffed animal with your hand and picking up a stuffed animal with a claw machine. Once you start measuring the player's movements, you're restricting what they can do to what the system can measure. Games that feel like you're using an actual gun don't narrow your focus to a reticule. Moving the gun feels natural. Granted, your movement in 3 dimensions isn't technically necessary, but it creates the feeling of authenticity, rather than feeling like you're using a gun-shaped mouse. Again, if it's a direct interaction and virtual reality that you're after, using the Wiimote like a pointer will not help. RedSteel isn't an all-around bad game. It just doesn't seem to understand that motion controls aren't used as substitutions for buttons.
Come on, Scott-san. Let's train now.
Motions are just a different way of controlling, and has its own characteristics and limitations. And motion controls aren't innately bad, most developers just don't seem to know how to use them. Wii Sports is proof that you can use measurement to feel like a direct interaction. And Metroid Prime 3 is proof that you can make a good FPS with the Wiimote. All that's required is a little understanding and experimentation.
Hurry, Scott-san!